So just some background, this first version of local law that Andy has passed out here is modeled on a sidewalk plan that exists in Ithaca, New York that we're examining first, and possibility to adapt to Hudson from there.
So what we have here is I basically took the charter provisions that we have presently in the Hudson Charter and just looked to kind of streamline them and update them. The way this proposed, but again, it's just for discussion purposes only. You know, this particular local law would, continue to make it the duty of an owner to repair the sidewalk. It would provide a mechanism for enforcement, through the DPW. Certainly that can be shifted. Ultimately, when we talk with Terry, he wishes to have it shifted, to code enforcement. But, beyond who does it in terms of, the process whereby it would be reviewed and notice would be provided, would be set forth in this local law. One of the interesting questions that we have to think about, and which is why I gave you some of the materials that have been utilized specifically in Ithaca, New York, regards the specifications for the sidewalks themselves, right? What we're dealing with here, and what really this committee and the council at large would need to give me a little guidance on would be, we want to make sure that these sidewalks are handicap accessible, available to all members of the public, so that someone can traverse the city from one area of the city to another safely. Okay, so that is the number one goal. We also have had over the last probably over the last decade, we've had some people come in and do some really nice jobs with sidewalks using alternate materials, not using cement. Some, like anything, some sidewalks are better than others. And so the question becomes, from an enforcement standpoint and from an administrative standpoint, how do you want to see that happen so that you can, on the one hand, ensure safety, on the other hand, maintain what some feel is a unique characteristic of Hudson in terms of having some different materials, having bluestone sidewalks and things like that. So, I'm not proposing to say, look, get rid of them. I'm just saying to you, there's a little bit of a trade-off when you deal with that. And to be fair to members of the public, we need to be clear in any legislation that we pass that this is how it needs to be moving forward so that people are treated equitably. Now, the whole other way to do this, which we talked about, would be to create essentially a special improvement district across the city,
right,
and amateurize it. I mean, there are some issues with that, and that is that one of the reasons it worked so successfully in Ithaca is because, they have at least one, really two, very large universities that are part of their streetscapes. They do an excellent job maintaining their sidewalks, right. So there wasn't really a lot of money that they needed to put in, yet they were able to essentially charge them a fee.
Right, based on their.
Yeah, so, call it what you want, but you had a large, well-endowed, two large, well-endowed institutions that could help kind of fund a special improvement district. You don't have that here in Hudson. So, that's something we need to think about in terms of the numbers.
Right.
And so what I thought in terms of, and again, we can go back to the drawing board, what I thought I would do is show you essentially ways in which you could revise the charter to, ensure that, we have a department within the city doing what is necessary, putting out the notices, and making sure that people comply and that they improve their sidewalks to a safe level. I mean, ultimately, depending on what the committee's feeling is, that's not, an outrageous claim, right? You have a piece of property, you currently have the responsibility to maintain that. you know, you give people some notice to know that they need to do this, and you enlist, be it Public Works or somewhere else, somebody else to go forward and enforce that. I will say, I know I did circulate this to Rob Perry, who does have a concern about staffing, right, and being able to do it. And so, like I said, you know, that would be a conversation that would need to be had with him concerning whether it should be Public Works, whether it should be code enforcement. I think even if it's code enforcement, you're going to be talking about additional staffing, at least in the short term, in order to carry it out. You know, the real concern I have is just thinking about how we want to go ahead and talk about what the specifications are.
Right. I mean, I think we'll have some input soon via the complete streets of the DRI. Once that gets further shaped, whatever means and methods they're using to establish sidewalk improvements and pedestrian safety in the western part of the city, DR in the bridge area, then perhaps we could adopt that or use that as something to apply to this as we move forward. And if there are other mechanisms to unlock funding, or I guess we have to have a further discussion. If it makes sense to bond or not.
Well, basically what this says, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you have a sidewalk that is, you know, in disrepair, DPW gives you X number of days to fix it, and if you don't fix it within those days, they hire a contractor to fix it, and then you're charged for the contractor cost.
Correct.
And currently, what do we have? We don't have any sort of...
We do. I mean, we have that language presently in the code sections. I just felt that they were not specific enough, and I don't think they were tight enough to make it clear, you know, A, to a property owner what was expected of them, B, what the procedural due process would be for someone that disagreed, and C, making sure that it was clear that if the city was going to incur the cost of repairing a deficient sidewalk, that there were clear mechanisms and legal mechanisms to recover that money. So this, I think, takes what we have and updates it, essentially.
Because right now, there's no means for the city to recover the cost.
I don't think it's where it needs to be. I wouldn't feel comfortable signing that. And the reason for the sampling is just to say, look, there are, you know, I didn't put in the specific specs. I just wanted to let you know, certainly we can have very clear specs on what is going to be required. Because there was a lot of concern the last time we were here from members of the public about ensuring that we do have safe sidewalks and crosswalks and curbing and all of those things would be included. So I just wanted to give you an example of how that would look. I mean, if the committee felt that this would be an avenue to pursue, I didn't want to go too deep in the weeds with Rob until the committee felt comfortable with it. If you do, I would then go and sit down with him and get his...
What is the definition of a sidewalk that's in disrepair? How much of disrepair before they give a fine and get someone else to fix it?
That really is left to... Well, that would go along with the standards, number one. Ultimately, it would be incorporated. But also, it would be a determination that, in this instance, would be made by the Commissioner of Public Works. So he would go out and do that inspection. He would notice you. You'd be entitled to a hearing if you disagreed. But ultimately, if it was found that...
so by inspection or by complaint.
So it's up to their discretion?
Yeah.
I remember last time we talked about if ADA compliance laws have their own levels of sidewalk.
I mean, they must.
Not compliant.
I mean, for what passes for a federal ADA standard, they have to, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how express it is, but yeah, we could certainly look at that. Yeah, we could certainly look at that.
Sure, sir. Well, I think this just merits more discussion amongst us and
State Street. Andy, could I ask, I don't think it's clear, it's not clear to me, who is responsible for the sidewalks on Warren Street? Is it the owners, or, because at one time, all of Warren Street was done, and that was paid for by the owners of each building?
Well, no, at one point, I believe there was a federal grant that allowed the city to come in and repair those sidewalks because they previously were brick and they were a nightmare. And that was a prior federal program which, you know, basically gave the city to put in brick at some point. And because of the maintenance issues that were associated with that, the city was able to secure a grant to provide those improvements and to have the sidewalk we have here. Moving forward, that is the responsibility of the property owner.
So Warren Street could look like the rest of the city at any time?
Well, I'm not sure I
Well,
understand.
on the north side, all of the sidewalks are uneven because each person is responsible for the sidewalk in front of their building. So if you have a little, you know, incline, or I think it's called a heave, there's a heave, then people just sort of plaster over it, cement over it to make things like that happen, or
Right.
just add the different materials, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, certainly the level of work that would be required on some of our streets to ensure that we don't have the heaving would be more extensive perhaps than what's been done to date, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to share some of those possible specifications with the committee, because they do have much greater detail with regard to subbase and packing and cement and things of that nature. But should those sort of specs be adopted, they would require any property owner who had a deficient sidewalk to make sure that they improved it and obviously matched it at their boundary line to their neighbor. And if the neighbor's sidewalk was deficient, then that likewise would need to be addressed as well.
So I'm sorry I haven't got a chance to really look at it closely, but is there any language in here about the implementation timeline? I mean, theoretically, you know, there's hundreds of potential violations right now, and I could see a horror show when the Commissioner of Public Works starts on my block as opposed to somebody else's block. And then do we know how long it might take him to sort of cover the city? And
We're going to have to leave a lot of this up to more basic fact-finding and trying to get a general sense of, first of all, what kind of approach we want to take to it. If we want to leave it solely on the property owners, if we want to move toward the Civica model that sort of creates a bond off of the total linear feet of sidewalks in the community to sort of share the burden costs across all of Hudson. We have to examine, so there's all questions of scale and timeline. So this is super preliminary before we even get anywhere to address what you're talking about.
And the interesting dynamic, it's a good one, is that there are, and one of the things we'll be getting would be some additional standards, because we do have some complete street improvements through the DRI that are going to be moving forward. So, you know, you get into a question of equality, right? Those particular properties that are part of the DRI, it's not their fault that they were part of the DRI. They happen to be near the waterfront, and, you know, those areas have been completely vetted, but that becomes a question of, okay, those sidewalks are going to be ADA compatible, you know, or acceptable. They're going to be improved. They are going to be in high trafficked areas. And yes, much of that work's going to be done through a DRI. So how do we deal with the other areas of the city? You know, one thing that we did kick around the last time we were here, and I know there's been discussion since, is are there opportunities for other grants to deal with sidewalks in other areas of the city? And then do you stage enactment of a local law such as this with that, so that everyone relatively gets a fair shake, you know? But it's difficult because, you know, you basically have two ways. Technically, the way it's always been done by most jurisdictions is that you're responsible for the sidewalk that abuts your property. And many people, when they move in, they do a great job of improving those. And that's one way, but yes, there's a cost that gets assess
But the
people.
city could set up a fund and access grants, and the lower income people that can't afford this could access that. I mean, there's lots
Scope
of
and scale, I think,
potential
is a big
things that
thing,
could
you
be
know,
done.
defining what the scale of the issue is, and how do we try to minimize that.
So yeah, now we're just trying to zero in on something and then approach all with Val.
But what
Just to
happened is
make
we had
note-
so many moving targets, it's like, okay, let's put a stake in the ground and now start.
But
The current specs that are applied to the sidewalks, coincidentally, I just hired a contractor to deal with my sidewalk, which is in terrible repair and was exacerbated by the water main break up State Street, so that the low point of State Street on the 400 block, it requires 6-inch sidewalks. There is currently 1 inch of curb, 6-inch curb, excuse me. There's 1 inch of curb because the pavement has become so high on State Street from repaving, it seems to me. There's no way I could possibly have a 6-inch, so I had Ron there today looking at it, trying to negotiate. And if I don't make my sidewalk higher than others, the water is going to continue to just pour into my building. So these are other things to consider, not only modifying the specs, but how these specs, how do they protect the homeowner's property, or how can one even try to protect their own home because of the condition of the streets or how they've been consistently repaved, and how that just creates a passageway for water to come pouring down the street directly into one's basements. And, you know, I originally took this on because I felt like my sidewalks were unsafe because they ice over so badly because of the unevenness. But then when the water main broke, it became clear that I needed to just protect my property as well as create safety for the pedestrians that are constantly walking up and down State Street. So it's something worth noting.
thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm also curious why the superintendent of public works is the person that's the enforcer. How does that collaborate with code enforcement? I mean, are you invading someone's territory over another person's territory? Right now it's a code enforcement issue, I believe.
No, in the charter itself, it is the superintendent of public works.
Well, what about
That's where
snow
these code
removal?
provisions
Like, is
came
snow
from.
removal like code enforcement? I believe
Yeah,
it
actually
is.
it is, yeah. it is.
So, I'm just curious how those two things sort of don't match.
Yeah,
And maybe that's a consideration in your
sure, yeah.
redesigning the, whatever you're,
Yeah, I think probably originally the reason that it resides in the charter provisions in Hudson and in many other jurisdictions is because you do have this interplay between sidewalks, curbing, and public streets. And so I think that's probably where, and the reason why it originally was vested there. But as I said, I need to talk to Rob Perry, because I know there is a concern about having the staffing to carry that out. But no, it's a very good point, making sure
anyway,
that
just,
some sort of consistency.
I mean, and I will support this idea on the 400 block of State Street. There is virtually no curbing, and the houses are suffering from water running into the basements because of the street is a disaster. So, I mean, you might want to think about how the city responds to when the homeowner is suffering from lack of, if the street is higher than the sidewalk, her house does not have a chance to survive heavy-duty water.
And here I am, stepping up to the plate, paying thousands of dollars to have the sidewalk repaired, and there's not, despite all of that, my property is not really going to benefit from it as far as it being protected from the water that comes charging down. Never mind if there's a water main break, that's an unusual occurrence, but if there's a downpour in the summer, like really a heavy downpour, which there are more and more of these days, I'm sure we've all noticed, that there's some changes in our climate here, the water still is, it's not a trickle, it's a bit of a river that comes charging downstairs.
Okay, but you are having discussions with them about the height of the curbing, because really, the curbing and the sidewalks are part of the homeowner's
I realize
responsibility.
that, and as I mentioned
I guess
today,
I'm not-
Ron came
yeah.
over this morning, my contractor at my expense is now going to have to remove the curb. Initially, he thought he would work to the curb, raise the height of the curb, and I'm going to have him raise it to 4 inches, which is going to make it very uneven with my neighbor's curb, which is much lower than that, and I'm having the pitch of my sidewalk unusually high away from the house to try to protect my house. Like, it won't be that you're walking and feel off balance, but it's really, after spending thousands of dollars, my only hope to protect my basement.
Isn't that something where Commissioner of Public Works could really serve a wonderful role by making sure everything is consistent, your property with the property adjoining it, property adjoining that, so that we have a consistency along the street and no one is having to act independently?
Yes, that would be beneficial.
And the
I mean,
Commissioner of Public Works,
I'm trying to be considerate of my neighbors too,
Yeah.
and not want to create a
let's just-
situation.
That's what we're talking about with these specs, to try to make sure we have uniform specs that can guide not only the commissioner, but also property owners, if the city decides to go that way.
Right, it has to be a citywide scope so it's equitable, and so we could do everything, hopefully, not in a hodgepodge manner, and address these problems, because they've been not addressed for decades. So what's happened to your house is part of the reason of Hudson's failure to deal with this infrastructure
Well, I
forever,
think that all
so
the
now we're
work
trying
I'm
to help.
putting in now, because I'm considering pavers instead of just one block of cement, and I'm certainly not going to want to redo my sidewalk next year.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? From the committee?
So what's the next step on this?
Well, I think we just have to keep getting data and try to talk with the folks working on the DRI, and talk to Rob more, and try to dial in,
What I can
take
do
all
is-
this into
Yeah,
consideration.
what I can do if the committee wants is I'll sit down with Rob with these provisions and go through them and get his input regarding that, as well as the issues raised by the public.
Okay,
Okay.
and then, okay, so then we'll keep it on the agenda for next month. Moving along, the short-term rental law that we've been considering here, different ways to address the growing concern the public has with Airbnbs here and what they're doing for the community, how they're interacting, the pros in terms of the dollars that they bring in from the city versus the cons in terms of what they're doing to the perception of rent inequality, and income inequality, rents increasing. So certainly there's a lot to unpack here, but we are going to move toward some equitable outcome here for all of us. So with that, Michael Chenese, who's a supervisor for the city of Hudson, is here to talk about efforts at the county level to address the same issue.
Yes, I brought some draft text for you all. Can I come up here? Is that okay? So first off, this is not about any kind of regulation for the city of Hudson. This is, the county is considering a countywide short-term rental tax. Brought a few extras for the crowd, sorry, there's not enough. So the county is considering a short-term rental tax, which is not the same as sort of, doesn't preclude or encourage any kind of regulation at the city or town level. But the county is considering a short-term rental tax, and a lot of the details have not been determined, but they're sort of, I sit on the committee that is reviewing this, and one of the major questions is, should the tax include the city of Hudson or not? And I certainly have an opinion about what we should do, which I sort of drafted up, but my hope was that the city of Hudson could kind of make a formal recommendation for how the city would like the county to move forward. So if it makes sense, I'll just kind of go through this text, and this is just a starter point. Figure it would be better if I sort of draft it, and then the committee can sort of make whatever edits you all want to make. So point one is that Board of Supervisors has a subcommittee to explore levying a tax on short-term rentals. It has not been determined whether or not Hudson would be included. The city of Hudson has an opportunity to sort of shape where that goes. As you all know, the city of Hudson already has a tax on short-term rentals, which generates about $240,000 in revenue for the city. The county does not currently levy a tax on short-term rentals. If the county created a tax on short-term rentals, if it included Hudson, it would mean that short-term rentals in Hudson would pay both a city tax and a county tax. or vice versa. If it did not include Hudson, that means that short-term rentals would just pay a city tax. The county is estimating a revenue of $636,000 annually if that included Hudson, or $397,000 annually if it did not include Hudson. And that revenue could either be used to improve countywide services or could be used to offset property taxes. So obviously that additional revenue would be a huge benefit for residents of Hudson and throughout the county. As we know, sort of sidebar, affordable housing continues to be a major issue here in Hudson. You know, we've seen studies, we have an action plan, we know it's an issue. And if we had some funding for those projects, we could move forward more effectively and faster. So one of the options is to earmark funds from a countywide short-term rental tax for affordable housing, and that would help alleviate those issues. And additionally, whether or not we include Hudson, or whether or not it includes affordable housing, I think if a county has a tax on short-term rentals, there's opportunities for shared services between the city and the county where we could share something like share the cost of post-compliance or share the cost of data sharing or collection and all those kinds of things that we could move forward on. So not at this moment, but you can imagine that going down the road there would be some opportunities for collaboration that would save us cost and we could do things more effectively. So sort of that sort of like sets the stage where we're at. My 5 recommendations would be, 1 is that we encourage the county to levy a tax and seek revenue outside of property taxes. 2, that we encourage the county to set aside that revenue for affordable housing. And include Hudson in that tax. If we don't include, if affordable housing is not earmarked for the funds, then we would encourage the county to not include Hudson in the tax. And then in a general sense, we look forward to partnering with the city and the county, look forward to partnering together, and whatever resolution is passed, that would be forwarded to the appropriate people on the board. So that's sort of my starting point, and then wherever you guys want to take it, have at it.
I'm just wondering, what the percentage of the tax would be at the countywide level?
It would probably be 4%.
4%.
Yeah, so nothing has been decided, but that's sort of the ballpark that has been discussed.
What's the lodging tax here?
4.
So it'd be here.
We pay lodging tax to pay, we actually do a Airbnb also to offset already the very, very high taxes for property. So we're the ones who are going to be double. We're paying already the double tax, now we're going to pay even more, in your opinion. So we're the ones who are double hit.
Well, the visitors are.
That's not true,
That's not
really.
true.
That's not true. At some point, they're not going to pay those prices anymore.
I've
So
never
it's-
raised my rate with the tax.
Pardon?
I've never raised rates because of the taxes, I just absorb the taxes, of course, because it is a competitive market. You want to offer people a good value.
Because you already pay sales tax, then you pay, that's already now 12% taxes, then it's 16% taxes. And that's not even where you're in, that's just where you're starting, because now you find, oh, you have a market, let's get some more. Why not have those who have empty buildings pay their fair share in taxes? Why not start there?
But that's not really a county issue, so.
We already have a vacant building tax on the books now, or I said, well,
Yeah,
a fee
but-
structure.
Yeah,
but we're using Hudson, and that's what we're sitting here talking about that. And that's a good point. What happened to there's an elephant in this room that nobody's talking about,
Yeah.
okay? And if you count a good amount of those buildings, there are more empty apartments there than the Airbnbs in Hudson.
Exactly.
Right. Nobody talks about that.
Yeah, because it's all in everyone's pocket.
But
It's not-
we are getting penalized because somebody, one resident in this town, started this conversation of the reason why we are here now.
And demonizes us.
And this is a person that used to do Airbnb, and now for whatever experience that she had, now she doesn't do it, so she doesn't want anybody else to do it. But let me tell you something. I've been in this town since 1998. And this is the second time that I have a personal income. Not revenue from my job, from my home, of all things, unheard of. Okay? And if somebody's going to tell me that I cannot use my home so that I can pay for my home, Does this make sense to anybody?
I said something I have to say, I do think that there needs to be some regulation of Airbnb, because some people are just, this is going rampant, through globalization, people see, oh, this is a revenue stream, and then everyone comes in and someone just buys 10 buildings and has 100 Airbnbs. That cannot happen, and that needs to be stopped. But we are part of a community. I love being in this community, and I love also being part of it. I love making a mural with the kids in the back alleys. I want to do more of that. I can't afford to do that if I get taxed my ass out of here. Then I'm out of here, and you're gouging with the wrong way. I think you're going at it with a sledgehammer when you need to go at it with a finer tool.
Absolutely.
And this needs to be a
This isn't,
conversation,
well,
rather than, just, oh, let's punish these
okay,
guys.
hold on a minute. So this is part of a larger conversation that the city government is having about not just short-term rental regulation, it's going to be about planning and zoning, things like Galvin and not-for-profits that that contribute something to this. Some of them contribute something to the city, some don't. Okay, arguably don't. So you have to, hold on a second, I'm not finished. So you have to figure out if we could create a fee structure that we could possibly use to address the problem with warehousing buildings that some of the not-for-profits do.
No comprehensive property taxes. They're just like, oh, whatever, or maybe, what can you afford? Okay, let's charge you that.
All right, well, please sit down.
Can I just say one more thing?
One more thing, and then we're going to open it up to other people on
Okay. We might be here next week with the other problem that we are facing, which is our property taxes.
Right, okay, so.
Triple, wait. I'm just bringing up a point. Have you guys considered the balance of what you're doing?
Yes, as I was trying to
At the
say
same
before.
time that you're trying to get
Jackie,
more out of the
Excuse me,
house.
as I was trying to say before you both interrupted me, that what we are going to do hopefully over the course of this next year is examine every possible way that we could reform how we do economic development here, how we could encourage types of sustainable development here that could take the burden off of taxpayers who are stressed and not seeing a lot for the taxes they're paying. I hear both of you deeply. At the same time, there are lots of very stressed poor people who've lived here generationally who feel completely at the whims of an economy they don't understand, and they feel that they're going to be driven out
Great,
because of
so
rent.
let's have a meeting here and ask Galvin to sit here.
Well, look, we are going to address the issue of non-for-profits one way or another. We could do only so much as a city of 6,000 people with a budget of $13 million to go after what the role of non-for-profits means in the New York State tax law.
So it's easier to do that for us, right?
No, it's not that. We're not trying
It
to.
seems like.
But
Yeah.
you guys don't
You're
have.
not going after them?
You have self-interest, and there's a community interest, right? So we have
But
to
we also
balance
have
the two.
community interest. That is wrong.
That is
That is wrong,
that
because
is
you
not-
say, okay, how can we control
I'm not
community?
saying that you
How can
don't.
we be the ones who are encouraging
You guys,
community?
I'm not.
We are also part of community, and
I
we
know.
encourage community. We do community things. We do all kinds of stuff. We raise funds.
Please, I'm
No,
not.
because that's wrong. Your narrative, you're saying we just interrupted you. You didn't say we contributed. We came
You
here
are
to contribute.
contributing. And if you-
Okay, so then don't voice us as interrupting.
Well, because I was saying, basically, we're saying the same thing, but you're both very understandably upset because you think that the city of Hudson is here to pick on.
I'm
Well,
upset
we're
because
getting
the
our
person
taxes
that started
tripled,
this
and
whole
then
thing-
you want to outlaw our income. So yeah, we're angry,
No one's talking about outlawing your income.
and you want to triple our taxes, and then you want to add more taxes. Thank you. Oh, that's only where you're going to start because then it's 4%.
No one's
Oh,
talking about
maybe let's
outlawing
go
your
5,
income
let's
here.
go 6, let's go 8, let's go
No
10.
one is talking about outlawing your income, okay? We're talking about trying to address stress that a large number of constituents feel here about affordability in terms of rent, and balancing that against your ability to make an income out of your property as you see fit. You have a constitutional right to make an income out of your property,
Precisely.
and we have a right to regulate it sensibly. I don't want to drive you out of your home, out of your
I
business,
thought it was
but
already regulated by charging me
But-
4% of every time somebody
But-
stays in my place.
But we are stressed here in terms of our budget, we're stressed here in terms of services, we are trying to find a way forward that 10, 20, 30 years out, we're not going to be in the same position where the two of you are very upset for real reasons because you pay high taxes, and you
Well,
see
there's
nothing,
no-
hold on, and you see nothing for what you pay, really.
Nothing.
And I understand that stress. So my role here, and all of you as participating as well is to figure out a way to do this where you don't feel screwed, and the people who are feeling stressed by short-term, by the experiencing what tourism and Airbnb, how it interacts in this community, could address both of those problems and come up with a solution that's not going to, create, this.
The only thing that upsets me is that the person that started this whole thing is not even here.
It's not just one person.
Yeah, but the person that started it is not here.
Go ahead, Mike.
This is a person to
Jackie,
bring
Jackie,
up her
take a
point.
line. Mike,
She started.
Jackie, this thing that's going on at the county, I think it's like much bigger than what.
What's going on with housing is going in the whole country?
Okay, yeah, so what's going
It's
on?
not happening just
the
in Hudson, it's
county,
happening
the
everywhere.
county's considering a countywide tax. The county is not aware of or particularly interested in sort of these like personality squabbles among Hudson.
Right.
So
No, you're
like,
just interested in money and in gouging.
You want to charge me 4 more percent for my property so that
So,
whatever it is that you have to do, fine.
Can I
But don't
finish?
tell
Can I
me
finish?
what to do with my
I'm not,
property.
so as I said when I first came up, this regulation there's nothing about zoning or what people can do with their property. The county is considering, much like Dutchess County has, much like
But that's
many
what
counties throughout the
started
states.
the reason
Jackie,
why we
Jackie,
are here
Jackie,
is
let him
because
finish, Jackie.
that conversation started.
Jackie, let him finish, please, and then you can respond.
I guess, so I'm coming from the county board of supervisors, so the county is considering a countywide tax on Airbnbs, much like Dutchess County has, much like many counties have throughout New York State. It is not particularly interested in regulating how Airbnbs function, and that's a debate that is happening within the city. That is not what this is. This is just saying the county is interested in creating a tax. And I'm coming to the city of Hudson to say, well, we have an opportunity to shape how that tax is functioning. Do we include Hudson? What do we want that money to go to? So just sort of re-pitching where this goes. If we decided that we want a tax to go, what I think an opportunity is, that can we shape this to put it towards affordable housing, that would be $600,000 annually to go towards affordable housing for the county, which we know we need. That would mean a housing coordinator, you could have a full-time staff member who's working on housing. Dutchess County, by the way, has 2 or 3 staff members who's focused on housing. And then in addition to that, they would have a very large budget to give out grants, to work on development. You could do a lot of things with that additional amount of money, and that could really be a game changer for how we approach affordable housing, not just in Hudson, but throughout the county. So I think that would be a serious benefit to the county. And the trade-off would be is that it would include a 4% tax additionally to everybody in the county. Alternatively, we could say, you know what, if it's not going toward affordable housing, we don't want Hudson to be included. That's sort of the baseline, but in this conversation, there's no judgment, there's no attacks on people who
Well,
have
let's find out
Airbnbs.
what the lodging tax has achieved. I mean, apart from that, we pay it, so
Right.
what has it achieved?
Well, the lodging tax is a separate line item, and half of it goes to the city, half of it goes to the main city budget,
Well, you
and
have
half
the
of it
same
goes to
number,
tourism.
so why is it if you came up with the same number, then you must know where it went to and what it achieved. So you
Yeah,
must- and we need disclosure, because the thing is, one thing that really upsets me, I don't mind paying my share of taxes,
right.
but what upsets me is that it seems to be all over the place, and that it's shameless, absolutely shameless. People in the public office, they're like, yeah, well, I guess you can pay for it. How about you pay for it? I think you can pay for it. You just came here, so why don't you pay for it? And that's what upsets me, because if it said, okay, it's an equation, it's square footage, it's got this and this to do with that and that, then I'm good. If it's a clean, clear number that is just a mathematical equation, yeah, disclose it, show us, But just to say, okay, oh, maybe I think you could pay more. I'll give you a break. No, didn't you inherit just now? Let's gouge you. That's where you get really upset, and that's where the anger comes.
Well, right now,
Because it's not comprehensive. There is no disclosure on how this property tax is assessed. It's just like, oh, maybe not you.
that's out of our hands here, right now.
I know, but that's where it begins. Because that's where our costs come.
Right
And in order
now,
to-
right now, your lodging tax is going toward, and this is something that the community should address as well, because it might have not been the best use of structure for that tax. It's worth revisiting and discussing. But right now, it goes toward a tourism board and studies to help the tourism economy that works here. So to your, it's supposed to work to the, half of it's supposed to work to the benefit of restaurants and Airbnb owners who are paying the Airbnb owners and the hotel people are paying the taxes. It's supposed to help continually sustain the revenue that's coming your way.
Yeah,
So banning Airbnb as being taken.
No one's banning Airbnb.
That was the conversation that was around.
That is, look,
That is
I
what
don't
it is.
know how to say this more clearly.
That was
This
the
conversation
conversation. That was
is
the first
not
person
a-
that started
not
this
about
whole
that.
thing.
Michael, you have
That's what
started
Okay,
it.
Jackie. Well,
Okay.
John is gonna, first of all,
I'm John.
John is gonna talk now.
I'm John Darby. I live in the 3rd Ward. I mean, I think one of the things that makes my blood pressure rise here is I thought we were talking about like regulation, and somehow there's a presentation by someone who has repeatedly been an opponent of Airbnb, and I just don't. It
Wait,
seems like there's something
how
underlying.
have I been-
Okay, hold on, let me just address this.
How have I been
At-
There's a background.
Hold on, Michael's
There he is.
hold on, let me address this.
Okay.
Michael's an elected official, he's a supervisor, he's coming here saying what the county is proposing or talking about doing in terms of taxes for short-term rentals. It makes sense that he would do that, given that we're talking about how we're gonna regulate short-term rentals in Hudson. And if he's saying that the county is talking about applying a tax, it's advisable that he comes to us and says, how do you feel about that? Because I'm listening to you guys, and I would say, okay, of course, it might be a lot to charge you now 8% on your Airbnb, right? And to then, okay, whatever it is, and then to tell Michael, well, the council has to deliberate, or we need further meetings with the public to see if this is something we should really do on that level. So as we're having this conversation here and trying to figure out the shape of what a short-term rental regulation will look like further, it makes sense that Michael would come here to say this, because on the county level, whatever the county does, it's important for us to know too. So then suddenly we're in a position to not strangle something or be too capricious. You know, we have to take all these things into account.
Hi, my name is Rafael. The reason I'm here is because the first time I came to listen to one of the meetings, people said, oh, you know, there's properties, some guy who owns 80 properties. So I thought, you know, people are talking with not numbers. So John and I were trying to get real numbers, and we are presenting to everybody real numbers, who owns what and how many. Because it's very easy to come over here and say, oh, my neighbor owns 80 property and it's a disaster. And everybody say, bravo, yes, it's true. When no, it's not the truth. So we have facts that we put it together. And we want, and me personally, want that any decision that we make regarding short rental has facts behind it. No stories or anybody who said things like that. That's why we get numbers. If we can get the numbers, you guys can get the numbers. If we have to get a group of people working with you on numbers and what's happening behind the doors, so you can present something, I would say, something that is reasonable to everybody, and making a decision based on that, then people will agree. Not somebody coming and saying something because they feel this is the way it should be. I mean, automatically 4%. Where are the 4% coming from? You know, I mean, it's something that has to be based. I mean, I have to be. I don't like this kind of reunions here, because all I hear is, let's tax those people who came from New York and bought properties here. The people who live here for years have the priority. That's not true. I'm here. I love this town. I work here. I pay taxes here, and that's the reason I moved over here. And I'm sure everybody here now live in Hudson because we love Hudson. And we want to work with you guys. And we want to work with affordable housing. We're not against affordable housing, but nobody's listening to us.
Well, I think we're listening to you, because
Well,
we're not
I'm
rushing.
glad everybody's here right now.
We're not rushing.
The narrative.
Hold on, we're not rushing to judgment here. What we're trying to do is do precisely what you're saying, which is take in information and then make a balanced law, okay?
Correct.
I would say that it is within means to have some form of short-term regulation that's a law addressing Airbnb. When this, it's a new phenomenon, and we have to do something about it, right? And we should do something about it. That's not rash or capricious. But that doesn't mean that because of your personal feelings, that there's not someone else who has very specific feelings as well to the opposite would come and say something, and I have to listen to them as much as I'm listening to you.
I
And
understand.
if
He's
they
not
were-
talking about feelings, he's talking about numbers.
I know, but part of it was about blood pressure and getting excited. And the point is, this is the second meeting that we've had where we've had robust input from the public. And has the council suddenly pushed something and shoved it in everybody's face here that says, this is the law that's going to be, you guys have to eat it? No, we're still developing this thing to make sure it makes the best sense and doesn't punish people indirectly. You know, but at the same time, this is in a small community, when you have large numbers of relatively large numbers of short-term rental units and a high tourist traffic, the perception of people who don't have the same means as homeowners, who are fortunate enough to be able to take their property and create income out of it, the people who feel a lot of stress or are poor here see that and they feel left out and they're worried. So that's a real, it's a real phenomenon. And in a larger community, you might not perceive it in the same way, but it's perceived to be a very acute.
But the thing is, everyone's steering the narrative saying, okay, pitting those against those, whereas affordable housing is a whole community's responsibility and not just the people who are providing short-term rental. And I don't think it's necessarily that's what's pushing them out. I think there's a lot of other stuff.
There is, and that's why earlier I was.
Renters,
Well, that's why earlier I was saying that part of this is going to be a constellation of things that we have to do as a city government here, which is address all of the factors that go toward rent instability and income inequality here, and ill-planned economic development, focusing on not enough broad things, trying to bring down or try to make eventually bring the taxes down and take the burden off of people and stuff. So it's not about saying that this is going to solve the affordability issue. Also, we slap a massive regulation on Airbnbs and it's going to go away. None of us are foolish enough to think that. There's going to
Well, you see, John, my point in that, what I said, is that that's how this conversation started. There hasn't been any clarity into how it's going to go, so it's still there.
and you've been demonized.
I just want to know, I want to know, how much consideration is being taken into, I heard about grandfathering, whoever was already doing it, and then passing a law so there won't be any more B&Bs.
Look,
If that was the case, I won't be sitting here discussing this, I have no problem, I'm already in. But you know what? The way I see the taxes and everything else, people that come here for the weekend, they just don't come to the B&B. They go to the restaurant and they go to the store. So that is also revenue that business is bringing to other businesses.
it's true, and that's why we have to be careful. This is an issue that's complex, and just precisely because of that, because we have such a distorted economy that we can't suddenly quash, because there are lots of people who do have a problem with tourism and they think that it's right. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that yes, it does bring in tax revenue to the city that's starved of revenue. So
Without an industry.
well, go ahead.
I mean, going off of that, Jackie, if we know that, for instance, if we know that Airbnb or if we know that the lodging tax of 4% is bringing in approximately $275,000 a year, right? So you take that 4%, if you multiply it by 25 to figure out 100%, what is lodging, 100% of lodging per year within just the city of Hudson. This is the first real number that we actually have. You're talking about $7 or $8 million in lodging just in the city of Hudson. Now, like you said, you could probably double that number for retail and for food and for everything else. So now you're talking almost probably like a $20 million industry within the city of Hudson that is now tourism, if not more than that. So I mean that's a significant number.
John.
To Rich's point, we should also include the number of people who have been dislocated from Hudson because of higher housing costs. No longer a part of our community because of tourism. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's not as easily quantifiable, I'm sure, but to Michael, if we were to go with a 4% county tax, right, if we were to add on to that additional 4%, we would not see but, adjusted for our population, a tenth of that.
Well, the proposal that I had is two-pronged. So one would be we encourage the county to set aside money for affordable housing, in which case it wouldn't be like every town gets a percentage of that affordable housing money. It would be like the county has a comprehensive affordable housing plan that would, I mean, obviously a lot of that would be focused on Hudson, but it would be countywide. So you wouldn't parse it up to be like this town gets this much of the affordable housing stuff.
But with our own lodging tax mechanism in place, would we save enough that, I mean, if we wanted to raise a lodging tax, and I'm not saying we should, if we wanted to raise a lodging tax, we could just do that and keep control of 100% of that money.
That's true. So the wash is that having a countywide approach to affordable housing that is drawing from a countywide revenue source, I would think would have a much larger impact than a Hudson alone solution.
So relative to Hudson, how much income is brought in via short-term rentals in the rest of the county?
The estimate is that if it included Hudson, it would bring in $636,000. It didn't include Hudson, it would be $397,000.
So it's mostly from Hudson, we get the least benefit from it.
It doesn't seem like, I mean, outside of the administrative costs, which I assume that we shared, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of benefit directly to Hudson.
Well, the benefit is you'd have $600,000.
The county.
The county has $600,000 to address affordable housing, which to address affordable housing solely within the city of Hudson, I think will be less effective. Partly because there's a lot more land outside of Hudson, and I think people who seek affordable housing are gonna like leave one municipality to another.
But isn't that the point, to keep people in Hudson?
And the county's relationship as a government with the city of Hudson has been somewhat troublesome in the past, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think still most of the services that I mean, I guess you could argue the same thing to be like, well, when we fund things for DSS, how much does Hudson really get? And I guess we could get into an argument about how much does Hudson get versus other towns.
I'm not trying to argue, I'm just trying to ask. I mean,
yes, I think that would be the rub, is that we would lose some control by ceding the power to the county, but on the other hand, you get a county-wide solution.
Right, and as a final note for the property tax owners who are complaining about additional taxes, the assessments.
No, I'm not complaining about it.
That's what I'm saying about
No,
taxes.
no,
Hold,
do not.
may I finish my point?
All right, but don't.
May I finish my point?
But don't,
But may
don't
I
include
finish
me
my
then.
point?
Okay, don't include me, because
Then
that's
to
not my
everybody
point.
at Charlotte who was complaining about property taxes, the assessments happened this year, and property values in Hudson went up relative to the rest of the school district. They have a $23 million budget, Hudson has a $12 million budget. So your school tax contribution is going to be much higher. There was a budget workshop last week, was anyone there?
I didn't know that. I didn't know.
All right.
I've been to lots of school budget workshops.
Peter, you had a question in general?
But quick question, this might have been handled, but is there a distinction maybe this is already made in Hudson, between owner-occupied B&Bs and non-owner occupied B&Bs?
Not yet, and that could be part of the consideration.
That would really,
Regulate.
that would certainly go.
John has compiled data. I mean, it's other communities regulate short-term rentals on that basis. Lots of them, because of the constitutional issues of how do you dictate what goes on inside a private home if you're a community.
We can do it. We can figure it.
And
If you can figure the sidewalks out, you should.
Andy could speak to this. I mean, I think as we've been doing some investigation.
No, you certainly can. I mean, there are many ways to look to address it. You look at it from a land use perspective, meaning district-wide, you can look at zoning districts. I mean, after the last meeting, which was very productive, and again, I'm not trying to set anybody off, but I went through our code. Obviously, it's being permitted now, but where the sticky wicket comes up is essentially in all but 1 or 2 zoning districts in this city, you're allowed to run a B&B. You're allowed to run a 2-family or more property where you're renting it out. So, you know, there are larger questions that John's alluding to that we need to analyze. And so, you know, people, you know, and I think John has actually highlighted it very well, the visceral reaction. The council experienced that in the last month. People are scared, and they're speaking out. And I think the benefit is you have a legal committee here that's listening to everybody, right? But, you know, owner-occupied Airbnbs, particular zones within the city, there are a lot of different ways you can look to analyze it, you know, in order to recognize that it is an industry in the city. It does derive significant tax revenue to the city, but also economic benefits to businesses throughout the city. I mean, as Rich alluded to, we're talking about the 4% tax. You know, we're ignoring the 96% of income that's coming in just from the Airbnbs alone.
Not 96, 8% sales tax on top of that, so we're
No, but we're just talking,
We're talking
we're just about the total number. Yeah,
Right.
just the
That's the
total
total
number.
number, 12% is going out already. So just keep it straight. And the thing is, I'm not complaining about taxes. I'm complaining about not being open about these things and about connecting dots in a wrong way. Because you're saying, oh, there's a housing crisis. Oh, it's the fault of the Airbnbs. No, it's not. You know, that narrative has to stop.
Exactly.
Right then and there, because if we could contribute, if our 4% could go to help housing, we'd like that. We'd prefer that over the tourism thing.
Yeah.
That
True that,
little curlicue here,
Absolutely.
you know, and it's a bridge, get over it, or whatever. You know, all these advertisements, I don't think that they help. And I don't think that they work. I think that there's a whole other, like, social media driven stuff and so on and so forth. And that this is a place of character, that there are artists here, that there are people living their lives in
No one on the council is accusing Airbnb of being the main factor for the affordability crisis.
You know, I think
The
we've
dots,
come from a
just earlier,
background
you
of
connected
that
the dots.
there was
Hold
this
on.
movement.
Hold on, Val,
Sorry.
connected what dots?
But by saying, you know, okay, you know, there is this lack of affordability and people are blaming Airbnb. So, I mean.
That's not, no, but you're not listening closely, so let me just say this. In the sense that there are multiple factors that are driving affordability problems here, right? And there was real estate speculation in Hudson before the phenomenon of Airbnb, and it continues. The amount of people who come here and buy real estate as an investment property to turn into Airbnb, I would say people are probably doing that to take advantage of it's a touristic economy here, and they can see a return on investment doing such. What does that do in a community like this? It has some problem, and you have to admit to that. So what Airbnb is, though, is the most visible phenomenon of a crisis of affordability to people who might not have the ability to connect the dots and feel a lot of income stress. So it's hard to parse quickly what's driving affordability. There are lots of factors, but this is a contributing factor. It's not the chief factor in it. So it's a responsibility of us to address it and to do it in a manner, like Andy's saying, that's not necessarily rash and capricious, where all of a sudden you're strangling something that we need in the short term to get over the hump toward a more stable long-term planning focus here. John?
So when I hear you talk and you come to these meetings, I feel at ease. I feel like you are weighing everything in. I feel like, okay, but then I like go to the other meetings where people are standing up and saying, we've got to address this right now. Supervisors are saying, we've got to address this right now. We're too slow. We've got to move fast. And it scares people. And it scares me because it's such a huge part of my income. And
Me too. That's all I wanted to say, is that I think that our reactivity is because when this issue came to the fore, it was organized by someone who was vehemently against Airbnb, and I think created an equation in many people's minds that is not factual. I mean, if people who weren't Airbnb, the properties that we own would not be affordable housing. We've invested far more, they're not going to be affordable.
The taxes are too high.
The taxes are too high.
We acknowledge that. I acknowledge that in the last meeting. I mean, I would say this, though, that this is not happening in a vacuum. Hudson's not the only community that's dealing with Airbnb issues nationwide. And it's a phenomenon that reflects, regardless of the pros and cons about it, I have personal skepticism over the idea of what the sharing economy represents. It means we're all fighting for crumbs, right?
That's right.
So,
Wait, say that again?
I mean, the sharing economy is just some sort of catchword for a bunch of people fighting for crumbs while there's people on top who are making lots of money. It doesn't mean that people can benefit from it to some degree, but we have we're caught in the winds of larger issues of income and economic inequality in the United States, and we're not the only community dealing with it. We have to balance our specific local issues to this wider phenomenon. And to say that it is a boon for homeowners to be able to get extra income out of their homes, but what is that, that has all other unintended and extra things that go on. Connect the dots too. Why do you need to do that? Well, because maybe you can't make money anywhere else, or it's not saying that, you need that extra income because X, Y, and Z, because costs in other places are too high. So,
John, you sit on the housing committee, I don't sit on the housing committee, but the City of Hudson has had a housing task force to look at affordable housing. And last July, we passed the Strategic Housing Initiative, What is the status of that?
Meaning what?
Like, in terms of like an outline of.
Well,
steps
it has to
that
do,
the city should take?
it has to do with coordination with the county, because the main issue of what Michael brought up is that one of the things in the strategic housing task force recommendations was that there would be a housing commissioner that was shared between the city of Hudson and the county, and part of that probably has to take shape with how the county would figure out what revenue stream to support that office, and what the city would do for that. So, and further to this, like John's brought data, we're trying to gather information to really get a sense of how, you know, the income stress that renters are feeling here, the balance to the amount of Airbnbs versus the amount of available apartments, the role of non-for-profits or other entities that might, yes.
And the amount of empty housing.
Yes.
Why does that not
I was
get
just about to
connected?
say that. So the role of certain entities that own buildings that could be potentially put on the market.
Name the entity, Galvin.
Yes,
Yes, hello, okay.
right.
On the
So,
record,
right.
thank you.
Nonetheless, the point, like, just as you don't know that what could happen when municipalities make laws or talk about things in a specific manner that could seem targeted or capricious, we have to also speak in the same manner when addressing other phenomena about stakeholders that own property here within their rights that we need to, you know, that create a challenge for us. We have to be careful in how we address it. But yes, Galvin is an issue for the community. John?
Could we just look at the numbers based on what the census tells us about what people, these numbers are pulled from the census, anyone can get them from
From the year 2000.
the last census, but they do an estimate of the prices people are paying in Hudson for rent amounts. They updated every year. This was updated last year. And if you look at that, and I'm not making this up, it's online, you can check it out. 26% of the people in Hudson pay less than $500 a month in rent. 46% pay between $500 and $999. 20% pay between $1,000 and $1,499. And 23% pay more than that. But if you look at the number of households, it's fairly small. Like, we have a huge number of people who actually fall into the who are paying affordable housing rates.
Well, there's also the
So
question of
the
Section 8 housing.
stress, and the numbers that were quoted in what you gave out, Michael, don't match what the census says.
Because the census data that you gathered, the county also did their own extensive study of housing stress.
Right.
And
I've noticed something also, like, you're supposed to, there's 65% of the housing units in Hudson are not owner occupied or rental units, but I've been trying to get from the city the number of those houses that are actually registered, and they should also say how much people are paying in rent. I don't think that's really happening. Does anyone know?
Andy?
I don't think we're supposed to report how much they're paying, right? I don't know why.
I looked at the form, and if you fill out the form, it is actually how much people are paying. So we should have that information.
How much the renters
How
are
much,
paying?
sorry,
or
how much
the-
the rent is, how much is on the market to be rented for.
Really?
My guess is,
I don't know what you're talking about.
What?
Can you clarify how it's?
I don't get what you're talking
You're
about.
obligated to tell your.
Yeah, you don't have to register,
Yeah.
like, your
So if you're
annual rent.
If you're a long-term rent, if you're renting a property long-term, you don't have to register it with code?
No.
No.
That's probably.
I'm getting different information because he told me you did, like, in a meeting with the mayor or someone said you had to. I looked online and it says you have to.
I don't think that's
But
ever
isn't
been
that
done.
the Hudson City website?
Which website?
You have to register for your
Well,
Airbnb.
that's a problem in itself. So so if you have a long-term rental here, you don't have to register with the city.
No.
But you do have to register for a short-term rental.
Well,
That's
because
right.
you're
So
running,
the
you're
code,
subject
so
to
that's just a
tax.
recipe, I
Because
mean,
there's a
it's not what we're
tax.
talking about, but that's a recipe for
There's a-
slumlords.
Excuse me, there's a tax on the Airbnbs, which is why you're registering.
yeah, because it
Otherwise, you wouldn't register if you were not an Airbnb, so that the city can collect tax.
But
And that was the
it
law that was
seems
Or
passed.
like,
just 1099?
it seems like that in a city where 65% of the citizens or housing units are long-term rentals, that we would have some way of tracking that and keeping up with it, and actually know if codes are being, so there's no code inspection, like people could just do whatever. Oh, this explains why. This explains a lot.
Well, look, this is also.
I'm sorry, this is not what we're talking about, but it is, but you are on housing. This is something
It's
I think
called
we should.
capitalism.
Yeah, exactly.
It's capitalism.
We do live in the capitalism.
I mean, it's unfortunate
I would say that.
It is.
if you don't like it, but the
I
reality
would say
is.
if we had a reliable census of rental units in Hudson that could be conducted by the city in a way that was affordable and actionable, that would be great, so we could know what we're dealing with here in real numbers. The county did a very good job, I think, on that, and the Strategic Housing Task Force, getting a sense and compiling real data toward that. But no, we don't have, we're just basically.
How did they get that data? Did they get it from the census?
So they compile, but if you walk by and you look at a single family home that's been converted into housing units, the only way we're gonna know what's going on in there is if the code enforcement officers had to go inside for whatever reason. So now we could use some mechanisms like the fire safety, the fire inspection checks. We could get some sense of what the conditions and/or, Michael.
I was just gonna add that out of the county housing study, one of the key things that pointed out was that there was the lack of quality housing. So there's both a lack of affordable housing, but even at the housing stock itself, it pointed out that there was sort of a lack of quality, and that's a challenge. And anecdotally, I've talked to people who lived in conditions that were unsafe.
Thanks, I agree.
And they were in a tough position where, if they report to code enforcement because their housing conditions are out of code, they then risk being evicted because the code enforcement can come in, and in this case, it had an unsafe living condition. They reported to code enforcement. Code enforcement came in and said, you have to do the following things. You can't have renters in here. And so then they were stuck finding a new place and couldn't find affordable housing in Hudson and had to leave. So that certainly is a systemic challenge that we have in Hudson. That is, we have problems, and I think one of the things so we had this housing action plan that the county did a study. The city, based off of that study, came up with a housing action plan that had several, it turned the study into sort of steps that we should take. The key step they had was we should hire a housing coordinator then we'd have the bandwidth to then implement the rest of the steps. That housing coordinator, there was, nobody came up with funds for that thing. So the question is how are we going to implement these things? Who is going to be the person to implement those things, and how will we fund it?
But there was a lot on there that did say, say the city could start the initiative in each of these things. It wasn't just in Airbnb was like two paragraphs in the very end of the whole thing, but somehow that's bubbled up to the very top. And all we talk about is we can't afford to buy the housing coordinator.
Conversations here.
We can't afford the housing coordinator, but none of those other things have happened.
We're happy, Michael's right, there's two different things going on now. We're parsing two different points.
Yeah, I guess I got thrown at the beginning with.
One more thing, I want to, we got Linda and Jackie, and then I got this one.
I have to leave.
Thank you.
So much. Thank
I
you.
just want to say one thing,
Go ahead.
that this is not a conversation that's Hudson-centric. The entire county is talking about the very thing we're talking about, how to regulate this Airbnb short-term rental issue. It is at pretty much every town board has had this discussion. It's been very hot and very excited conversation. So the conversation is going to continue. The issue is how do we regulate it? How is it going to be taxed? This all is in the air and it's not going to go away. This is a reality of what's going on in the county. And the county would not have come up with the idea of tax if they didn't see it as a potential income. And one of the discussions in the county has been if it could go for roads, they might support it. So that's just, we sit in the room with a very different group of people than you have here. It is Copake, Ankrum, Hillsdale, Kinderhook. It's a big, big discussion about this very phenomena that's happening, from glamping to camping to houses that once were neighborhoods which are now empty, and they're becoming wedding excursions and partyvilles, and it's becoming a really incredibly complex problem for our community. So this is a big discussion, and I think it's a great one
It's
And
not
it's
only a
happening
problem.
here. Pardon?
There is another side to it, other than it being a problem. It is part of what has also brought money to Hudson on many different levels. I mean,
I
I
get
get
that,
it,
I
yeah,
get
it
that.
is. It's just,
I get
it's
that.
I want to
multi-dimensional.
start bringing, we have
I get
more
that,
agenda items here,
that's all.
so I just want to get through a couple more questions and start reining it in. The idea also, back to what I was saying before, it is bringing in money now, but tourism is a fickle thing. So a short-term focus, because we're making a lot of money out of a certain phenomenon, is no way to govern long-term. So part of this, this is going to be, we're not moving fast toward enacting something about short-term rental until we know exactly how we want to do it for Hudson, is precisely, we have to, really dial in and make sure that we're doing everything in concert with these other initiatives that we want to do here to address this problem of sustainability. Michael, and then I want to go to Peter, and then we'll close this.
Okay, I also just want to refocus why I'm here.
Yeah.
It's kind of coming off of what Linda was saying, is the county is considering this policy. They're going to come up with a plan. I sit on that committee and they say, hey, Michael, what do you think, what do you want to do, and or what does Hudson want to do? And so I'm offering the city an opportunity to speak with one voice.
So,
I get a starter, you guys can do whatever you need to
so
do.
just to bring that back, so
Yeah.
then as a committee, when we'll continue discussing with the water council, the idea would be, do we leave a carve out, or would the county leave a carve out for Hudson because we already have a lodging tax if we opted out, or would they do that and impose that on top of ours, or would they leave?
A carve out is certainly an option, which is the reason why I brought it here. If it wasn't an option, there would be no use in me doing that. So it hasn't been decided there will or won't be a carve out, but it's an opportunity for us to speak with one voice. So that is the reason why I'm here. If we don't make a decision, in essence, you're leaving it up to me to decide.
I mean, part of the issue that's come up in the finance committee is the percentage of the sales tax that comes back into the city of Hudson that the county collects, or the state collects, and comes to the county and into the city of Hudson. And that, even the finance committee, I think Rob, myself, we have, part of one of our agenda items for this year is to really understand that equation, that formula, and is the city of Hudson really getting its own fair share back in sales tax? So when I hear that the county wants to take more tax out of the city of Hudson,
It's not a want.
Well,
I guess
yeah,
I'm offering an option. There's no
yeah,
well, that's what we
options.
Right.
If the county options to take tax out of the city of Hudson, we just want to make sure that, in terms of coming back to city of Hudson, that there's some sort of equity.
Okay, so we're left with, in terms of the county's position, we have to also, as we're entertaining our short-term rental regulations, think about if we want to carve out or if we want how our relationship to this discussion with the county will be. So I thank you, Michael. Peter, one more, and then we're going to move on to talking about parking.
Can I just address this, what's been sort of the subtext throughout this meeting is the assessments and the assessed values. And I have had from day one, I feel like, I've been here since 80.
You've been here too long.
Too long. It feels like Groundhog's Day. I've seen many assessments, or many times it seems like the same thing happens, which is why I wrote this and started the petition on March 15th, which is a while ago. And I just want to read the 6 reasons, because I think they will help focus some of the conversation we had tonight on this question. 6 reasons to sign this petition, and the petition essentially asks the city do something immediately about the current assessment problem. You can come up, I've only got one copy, you guys have copies of the petition. So the 6 reasons we think you should sign the attached petition. Number 1, the city has taken property value increases accrued over the last, I said 8 years, but I think it's 5 to 6. They've taken property values increases accrued over the last 5 to 6 years and applied them to a single year. Number 2, by the same token, the city has taken but a small sampling of sales, and only from the last 2 years, to impute a current value on properties that should be spread out over the 5 or 6 years. Number 3, the city has not taken account of speculative purchases, including B&Bs, which inflate housing prices and drive out current owners, nor factored in the enormous number of properties that are not taxed. Number 4, the city has not addressed the incorrect and unfair categorization of properties, which not only lower assessed values by definition, but which also deny property owners the right to find properties fully comparable to their own. This is all, as I'm hearing now, as we're going through the GAR process, I'm hearing that the comparables are just wacky. Number 5, by contracting with an outside company to do the revaluation, and this has happened 4 or 5 years ago, the same company, the city is admitting its own incompetence, not properly assessing properties for the last 7 or 8 years, and then making taxpayers pay for that incompetence by having to hire an outside firm to come in and do what it should have been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. Finally, number 6, this flawed evaluation will have a negative impact on public policy concerning affordable housing. The stratospheric increases in assessments are not sustainable for middle income and fixed income residents and homeowners. They will result in an increase in short-term rental properties, short-term rental property rents, an increase in monthly rents, a decrease in affordable housing, and the gradual squeezing out of a stable middle class.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I add one more thing to that?
Everyone, very quickly, we have some other
Thank
agenda
you.
items, so why don't we move on from this? We're going to continue the short-term rental conversation. Linda can say one more thing.
Just one more thing, the school budget is a separate item, and this is also, you have to consider that in what Peter has said.
Thank you.
Thank
So,
you.
these are good, this is ongoing, so next month, Charlotte, please come back and keep participating, okay? Now we're going to talk next quickly about parking, which is, we'll want you to introduce it, then we'll go through it.
So, we've had a lot of discussion for a while over the parking regulations. This is just in the central commercial, essentially Warren Street environment, okay? And what essentially occurs is if you have a business.
Could you, y'all, could you please wait to sign the petition until we're done?
I got it.
All right. I want to get through this.
Okay, so if if someone's operating a business on Warren Street and they're operating it as, let's say, a clothier, and then they decide they're going to modify it to a coffee shop or a cafe, they are required under the code, which is a good thing, to come in for site plan review and approval for the planning board. And when they come, they run into one of the provisions in our code which deal with the amount of off-street parking spaces you have to have. And you'll see right in the code in the second section, if you're, utilizing any, something where eating and drinking places are involved, for every seat you have to, you have to have a parking spot for every 3 seats. So they're on Warren Street, it's an existing building on Warren Street, the only parking is on Warren Street, and the planning board rightfully says, well, where is your off-street parking going to be? Well, they don't have any. So they then are sent to the zoning board. They spend another month in front of the zoning board. The zoning board sets a public hearing to hear that. People come in, there's not really been much comment with regard to that. And ultimately, my understanding is the zoning board has been granting the variances for that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The zoning board grants the variances for these instances. And so, what the zoning and planning boards have been asking is that the committee take this up to consider, eliminating that. And so, what you have in front of you, just for conversations, background, what you have in front of you would be a proposal from our current code, okay? 325.19B, required off-street parking spaces, okay? When you look at this, subdivision 2, II, that is the current reg that applies across the whole city. The proposal would be to add this provision 1 to just say those minimum parking spaces would not be required in the central commercial. Everywhere else, it will still be required.
I mean, is there value in just getting rid of it everywhere? rather than
Why
just
not
the-
residential? Why not
It's unconstitutional.
Probably.
Unconstitutional?
Sorry, I think you should do it for the whole city then.
No, it's not unconstitutional. Sorry.
Come on.
It's called zoning.
I tried.
So, no, you certainly can. I started with what I was told, okay? I didn't want to be accused of being, eliminating parking across the entire city. That being said, when you look at the map, there are certain areas, right? You have your general commercial areas, you also have I was gonna pull up the map, you have a general commercial transition area, which is kind of going out Green Street, okay? And the question becomes, some of those businesses, you think about businesses along Green Street, they do have off-street parking. I mean, so again, that's a policy decision for this committee, right? I mean, when you look at the central commercial, you're talking about Warren Street and these areas where you've got a kind of a defined urban scape, if you will. As you move to certain other areas of this same city, there are areas where there's parking, but certainly you can do that. Yeah, I mean, I can pull up the map.
I mean, the rationale for doing it citywide would be if we do want to try to encourage a move back to a density type footprint or construction policy in the city of Hudson, it would behoove that, if you're wanting to build housing in another area, you have to have appropriate parking spaces for that. It dictates a type of development that further puts pressure on what you're talking about.
Yep, but no, you certainly can. There's no prohibition. I'm not suggesting you can't do more.
If someone wants to make a studio out their carriage house in the back, they need another parking space for that.
Right.
This is like one-stop shopping for every question.
It feels.
So on the alleys, what's the parking? I've happened
In
to.
the alleys, this is.
What do you do? Can you park there for like ever?
No, there are parking requirements that exist. I mean, I'll have to pull them.
Okay.
But these are specifically for, what I'm talking about are specifically for retail.
Okay.
We have a provision which basically says if you're, involved in certain commercial uses, here's the schedule. And we apply it the same, along Warren Street as we do Upper Green. It's the same regs.
Right.
And it's been really causing a lot of turmoil at the planning board.
I have a question. I live in Columbia, across the street from the hospital. And Monday to Friday, from 6 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, there's no parking. I don't have an ID, so I cannot park in the back. So there's no parking there because the employees of the hospital park all along the street. Since 6 o'clock in the morning they're coming in.
Yeah, this was an issue that the last council was trying to figure out as well. So I mean, I hear you, and I think we should definitely try to figure
Because
out.
I was talking to somebody who said that sometimes you can do like a residential parking and select a few spots for residential and then the other one for the rest. I know that the hospital offer, parking, but the price that they're paying for.
Yeah, well, and that's public park, you know what I mean? Those are, anyone, if you get there early enough, you can park there.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. So
there's nobody here, it's a 3 or 4
yeah, we're
cars.
talking about here.
That's like a hospital house. Right, there's some continuity.
But then I start thinking about it. I mean, great, but it is a little bit.
Well, let's.
Because other people have, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Tom, did you want to?
Yeah, no, when I read the proposed law this afternoon, I was kind of disappointed that it just applied to the central commercial. I was hoping we would apply it across the city. Because, there are situations, for example, like Linda's, who has more parking than she actually needs because of the code, and could do other useful things with the extra.
That's what I think we want to encourage.
Actually, I think our code, when we came in, we had to provide so many people.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
And we do, and that's what
We've
they.
been law-abiding for a long time.
Right. The point is, if we change
you are.
it, you wouldn't have to use all
Right,
that.
you could do something else with part of your parking lot.
Sell them.
So that could be, maybe we should for next month.
We had to have those to open our business.
I understand that.
And we could be renting them.
Or you could build
Could be.
even on your lot.
No, you certainly,
Just saying.
the council can certainly expand that. I think I was just saying to John, the one thing to consider is the lack of off-street parking, again, just hypothetically, the lack of off-street parking on Warren Street really, we can debate, really has not been a problem, okay? I mean, relatively. is that because we do require some off-street parking in other districts, or will it not matter? If it doesn't matter, then you can extend it to the general commercial transitional, you can, we have the map in front of us.
Right.
You can expand that footprint. I figured let's focus here for discussion purposes and then hear from the committee and the council, where do we wanna go? But certainly, if we were to do that in this proposed law, all you would do is take that first provision
Exactly.
and add the other districts.
Okay.
But it is an issue that, particularly in the central commercial, that's the one where the zoning board or the planning board.
Right, because they give them a variance, always.
They're just
Yeah,
seeing.
it's just that,
So it
the
makes
body
sense.
show up in a room,
Yeah.
they wouldn't
It's
see
like
it.
I have the law.
Hmm?
Yeah, and it doesn't, I could be wrong, it doesn't seem like they've had to give a lot of variances outside of that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't change it, I'm just saying it's it's zoning, it's gonna be a burden, so how far do you wanna go?
Okay.
Yeah, I get that. I will say that Etsy rents 20 spaces from TSL, so there's 20 cars not on the street.
Right.
There's another group that has asked me to park. It's on the group on Fifth Street and the Northeast Child Services. They had about another 30 cars they wanted to park.
Right.
So it's growing.
There's
and
a question,
yeah,
so
so-
let's say someone hypothetically were to buy a building like Etsy, do a full rehab of it, put in 200 employees and not be required to meet any parking
But
requirements.
they wouldn't
That's
do
the
it,
question.
that's the point, they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't
And they wouldn't
invest
do it.
like that if they knew they couldn't provide parking. So it kind of determines how things develop.
Yeah,
Just like a restaurant isn't gonna go in a neighborhood where
Because
no
then
one can park.
they'd have to have below grade parking to build a building to accommodate the people who work.
yeah, no, we can, again, I just figured, I knew that was the central issue.
Yeah.
When I started to draft it, I did consider those other zones, I figured I'd wait for the feedback.
So is your sense that we should do it incrementally, or should we just go ahead and shoot for the stars?
I think, based on the nature of this particular provision, it really does kind of deal with what I would say are more commercial zones. So, you've got the central commercial, I'm just looking at the map. You could include, general commercial transitional, residential special commercial, and riverfront gateway district, right? Those are,
I'm more inclined now to say it should be a citywide lift, and then as we sort of methodically start piecing together, if we're gonna have a form smart code, form-based code, or whatever the transformations that we're gonna do in terms
And we put
of
this out there and see how.
building law, we start sort of trying to see how things interact.
well, that would be even easier from my perspective. Because what we would do is this B2, we would just get rid of it.
When people come to the planning board and ask for an easement of this, has it ever been,
We'll have to go to the ZBA.
but has it been denied?
Not that I'm aware of.
So basically, we have a law in place.
But a lot of them are in the.
But even if it's not denied, there's enough people who then won't go through the variance procedure, and then if they're building a dwelling that they could have entertained building 4 rental units, they might decide, I'm not gonna do it, just build a home where they could have 2.
For example, the vacant building on the corner of Union and Fifth, owned by Galvin, nevertheless, could not develop a lot of apartments because there's a tiny off-street parking space. Were that to change, they could develop as many as they wanted, within reason, knowing that, what the parking is in the neighborhood. Shannon McGee, who bought the old theater on Warren Street, wanted to put in more apartments, but because of the code, he could only put in 2 because of the parking. So that's sort of sad that he couldn't put in 4.
I've even heard stories about like the pocketbook factory, if that was ever to become
Right,
housing.
if they ever become housing, it's.
It can't now. Or I guess it could.
Hudson, I think, is always this suburban, there was a suburban Hudson, and I think that we're suffered from that.
Right, well, the code written
No,
in
it
the
was
70s
adopted,
was
but it was-
suburban.
So
leading
we
population.
need to, that's really where we are, and I think that we're more urban than suburban.
we couldn't build the city of Hudson right now based upon the code that's in place.
No, that's an irony because that's true.
So you could, I mean, you could take this and just simply say parcels of real property to be developed within the city of Hudson will not be required to establish a minimum number of
I think
accessory.
that might be better, and then we can just start the debate that way rather than narrow focusing on it too. And then, thank you. Finally, we have some new business.
Do you want me to prepare that?
I think so, yeah.
Should I forward it on to the council?
Yeah, let's do that in a while.
Okay.
We have one more quick new business, and this gets back to some of the comments that were talked about before. Various council members and other people in city government have struggled with the issue of non-for-profits and the positive things that they do in the community versus the weight that they carry in terms of starving the city of municipal tax resources. And because of that, I would like, and Alderman Volo and other people as well as have mentioned this, try to see what is in the municipal toolkit that's possible in terms of dealing with not-for-profits and in the balance of use of city services. If there's a way that the contribution could be, like what could we do in regards to Galvin or the other large property owners, the hospital, people who, the county, who.
Hospital does pay a pilot,
Right, but beyond the pilot.
right.
Yeah, I started looking at this today. What I can tell you is this is a movement that is across the country.
Yeah, I've been reading that.
You know, so there are, as you would expect, there are advocacy groups for not-for-profits that have, and that's really where I got some of my information. You may have come across some of the same stuff from Maine to California, where jurisdictions have tried different things to try to do this. What happens is they run typically afoul of their state law, which recognizes
constitutional,
certain
right?
real property tax exemptions that exist for property. So the question becomes, if you call something a fee when it's really a tax, it's going to be struck down. And so, I've just started looking. I'm not saying that.
Right, I saw some in terms of, that were talking about curbing and linear feet in terms of sidewalks, because similarly, if we do a sidewalk law, you have to have an assessment for all of Galvin's properties, the hospital, et cetera.
Right.
Andy, is it the assessor who judges the nonprofit?
Yes. Yes.
So in other words, if there's a nonprofit that has a building that
Yes.
isn't really living up to its, right, what it's supposed to be doing as a nonprofit, that's in his office to be determined, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And what I can say, Justin's been here, I think for maybe just a little over a year, really, or a year and a half,
Yeah.
maybe 2 years. I can say that, maybe perhaps in the past, those were not looked at as closely. I know last year, he went through, a very extensive review of those required leases to see what, rent was being charged, or was it being charged as affordable housing rent. We did make some corrections based upon that review, and I think as part of the current reevaluation, that's going to be ongoing. But he's not just taking applications and stamping them and saying you're not for profit. Certain things are mandatory, by code, but kind of the affordable housing civic organization realm of not-for-profits are subject to a pretty long packet of information that gets provided to the assessor that he reviews.
And is that available for anyone to see?
The packet of information?
You can find out who has the exemptions.
Yeah, right on the rolls. It'll actually list the specific property and.
And is the assessed value of that property there as well?
I believe it is.